Goldblatt. We are the co-chairs of the Torah Restoration Committee. We have a lot of committee members here, board members, members of the congregation, friends from the area. I just really want to thank you all for being here tonight with us all. Before we begin, I ask please turn off your telephones. I want one of those things to go on where it rings and everyone starts looking at their phones. We're just waiting for Rabbi Hale to come back. He's been here since 4 o'clock this afternoon working with our school children, having dinner, and then coming to this event. So it's a pretty full day for him, and we're very happy to have him here. I'd like to take a moment. Someone left their phone in the multi-purpose room.
Oh, wait a
Mona.
minute, that's Jim's.
Jim, is this your phone?
You knew that was her phone?
I was sitting
Spousal retrieval. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for this evening's event. Men's Club, thank you so much for contributing to this day and making it happen. I really appreciate it. And Rich is president of Men's Club, and we're happy to have him here. Lisa, thank you. Lisa Kugelman is president of Sisterhood, our desserts, along with some volunteers who brought their desserts along. We thank Lisa and everyone on Sisterhood who contributed. We also have the Jewish, I'm going to say that, Historical
Society.
Oh, I got it totally wrong. All right. Historical Society of Greater Hartford. Ellen Lesher is, are you an officer? On the board of the Historical Society, and they have been one of our co-hosts for this evening. So we have a lot of support. We have a lot of support. I want to take a moment to really thank the committee and board members and everyone who's contributed their time and effort. Mike Ungerleider, who's being our photographer, Roy Schwartz, who's being a photographer, to spouses and children who have helped along the way. Tonight is a really very special night because we wanted to introduce Rabbi Kevin Hale to you because he's going to be very much a part of our community over the next several months. And I think it's important that he get to know us and we get to know him. And he has a lot to share with us tonight. Rabbi Hale is called a Sofar STEM, S-T-A-M, little m. And he's going to explain what those letters stand for. I learned about it tonight. He's traditionally trained as a Torah scribe who spends his days evaluating, repairing, and writing Torah, Tefillin, and Megillot, with a special focus on restoring Torahs of the Czech Memorial Scrolls Trust. Rabbi Hale's mentor was Rabbi Eric Ray, of blessed memory, a world-renowned Sofer artist and authority on the provenance of Torah scrolls. Kevin is a scholar and a teacher of our sacred scribal traditions and works as a scholar in residence to congregations all over the country and beyond. He is passionate about offering hands-on education and enriching our connection to Torah. He and his family reside in Northampton, Massachusetts. Rabbi Hale, as I've seen today, works so well with our young people, had them enthralled with Torah. And we talked about it at dinner, about the importance of Torah in our lives, not just as an object, but as something meaningful to all of us. And I think that's what makes it very important. Rabbi Hale has served as a rabbi in from the Reconstructionist Rabbinic College in 1997 and from the late Rabbi Zalman Schechter Shalomi, hope I'm saying that right, and the Aleph Vat in 2013. Since 2017, he has been affiliated with the Rabbinical Assembly. The 613th commandment to write Torah is addressed to all of the Jewish people. As a dynamic service leader and teacher, Rabbi Hale draws in people of all ages and backgrounds to activate within each of us our potential as Torah scribes and to attune our eyes and hands and hearts to this most essential but often unknown or misunderstood Jewish mitzvah. We want to begin the evening before Rabbi Hale comes up here to show you a short video. Many of you have seen it. It's only 5 minutes long. We just wanted to share it with all of you because we think it's a great introduction to Rabbi Hale. So without further ado, Ruth is going to try to get the video going. Here we go.
ישיר משה ובני ישראל את השיר הזאת לאדוני ויאמרו לאמור.
So as Jews, we believe that Torah is a gift from God. It acts as the spiritual glue that binds us together as a people. It's not only the foundation of our moral and ethical lives, but it's also a part of who we are as Jews. Here at the Farmington Valley Jewish Congregation, Emek Shalom in Simsbury, Connecticut, we are embarking on a year of Torah. In an attempt to weave this Torah into the fabric of our lives and teach the world that Torah needs ongoing care and nurturing just like we do, we'll be paying special attention to 2 of our Torah scrolls that are in desperate need of care. Both of them were permanently loaned to us by the Memorial Scrolls Trust for safekeeping after being rescued from the Holocaust. Scroll 752 from the Klaus Synagogue in Prague and Scroll 1412 from the Ostrava Synagogue in Czechoslovakia both reside here in our sanctuary at FVJC. By 1942, Jewish communities throughout Eastern Europe were sending their Torahs to the Central Jewish Museum in Prague for relative safekeeping. A handful of Jews who worked in the museum convinced the Germans to save artifacts and Torah scrolls. These Torah scrolls were eventually rediscovered in the 1950s by a London-based antique dealer. Funds were raised, and in 1964, the Westminster Synagogue in London bought the remaining 1,564 scrolls from the Czech government. The Westminster Synagogue then established the Memorial Scrolls Trust to oversee the preservation of these survivor Torah scrolls. Since the 1960s, the Trust has distributed the Torah scrolls worldwide to synagogues and other institutions who've agreed to assume the responsibility of caring for them and holding on to them for future generations. In August of 1973, the Farmington Valley Jewish Congregation, Emek Shalom, obtained a Torah from the Memorial Scrolls Trust in London. For the past 44 years, we have celebrated with it for countless simchas and b'nai mitzvah. In 1996, we were able to obtain a second Torah from the Memorial Scrolls Trust. It's scroll 1412, and unfortunately, it is only used for display purposes as it cannot ever be made kosher due to the damage it received during the Holocaust. In order to properly preserve scroll 1412, it needs to be cleaned and, if financially feasible, placed in a sealed, climate-controlled case. It has been quite a while since we were entrusted with these precious gifts, and as we began this journey, we realized we needed to do more discovery about our scrolls. Scroll 752 is only one of 3 Torah scrolls from the Klaus Synagogue in the United States. This beautiful Torah contains a unique blend of Ashkenazi, Sephardi, and Kabbalistic style letters. This type of scribing, or safrut, is no longer used when writing new Torahs, and harkens back to the old Jewish community of Prague. This particular Torah scroll is estimated to have been initially scribed between 1750 and 1775. For approximately 260 years, this Torah has been in use. 44 of those years, it's made its home right here in our community. Currently, the edges are ripped, some sections have tears and holes, and it needs to be cleaned desperately. Until repaired, it's not considered kosher, nor should it be used at all, as it's so fragile. It also needs functional rollers and a brand new plaque, as its original plaque was likely lost. Only a handful of sofrim are approved to repair the Memorial Scrolls Trust Torahs, and we are very fortunate to have found Rabbi Hale, a known expert in Holocaust survivor scrolls. He will be our guide and sofer as we embark on our year of Torah, as we journey to restore Scroll 752. We will rededicate this survivor scroll and celebrate her restoration during Simchat Torah this upcoming year. Throughout the year, there will be opportunities to donate and to scribe with Rabbi Hale as he restores Scroll 752. Come and be a part of history with us. Help us pass on this beautiful gift from generation to generation, ledor vador. We need your help to restore this scroll so that she can tell her story for many more generations. Please consider donating at www.fvjc.org and/or our GoFundMe page. We'd love if you could come and scribe with us and with Rabbi Hale to help us restore this beautiful Torah. Amen. Vayvarech Elohim et Noach et banav, vayomer lachem, peru orvu umilu et haaretz.
Even I've seen this video probably 3 or 4 times, and it hits me right in the heart. I want to take one moment to thank 2 other people here tonight. One is here and one isn't, and that's Lowell Goldblatt and Michael Bonchek. These 2 men were persistent. They said, we can restore this Torah, and they didn't take no for an answer. They were the 2 that really started us on this quest, and we are indebted to both of them, and thank them both for their efforts. I think you heard 2 familiar voices on that video. One was Adrian Duralesta, and the other is Leah Bonchek. So they are very much a part of it, talking about generation to generation. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to all of you Rabbi Hale.
Is that you have to keep tea away from your Torah. Thank you all. I was fiddling on my phone because I needed to look up what is the wording of the title of my talk. And so someone correct me, but it's really what are some issues of looking ahead in the restoration of something that's so connected with memory. And so really brings us to the question of what is this thing called Torah? And I'd like to share some about the tools and materials that go into our sacred scribal enterprise, what I like to call a 3,000-year-old publishing partnership with God. And look at that, and look at the scribal tradition as it is living today, and then ask some questions about looking forward, both about the place of this central task of the perpetuating of Torah, as it relates to original writing, but also about restoration, and then especially to open it up and to have a conversation. So I'd actually like to begin with a fragment of a Torah scroll. And this happens to be from a synagogue in Brattleboro called Shir HaHarim, the Song of the Hills. And it's damaged. It's actually damaged beyond repair. So let me introduce my teacher. What I share with you about my understanding of the writing and repair of Torah came from Dr. Rabbi Eric Ray of blessed memory, who was a master scribe who loved Hebrew in all of its forms. He had a colorful, really larger-than-life story. And for those of you who know your Jewish history, Israeli history, he arrived to fight in the War of Independence on a ship called the Altalena, which was sunk, and he waded ashore. And one thing led to another in his life. He was a genius calligrapher already in England as a teenager. After the war, he was enlisted to be smuggled into Dachau, which was then a DP camp. He said that the survivors were still wearing their prison garb, and he spent months forging papers so that survivors could get to what was then Palestine. And being curious what it was all about, he arrived, and like the fellow survivors on his ship, although he survived actually guarding one of the Queen's palaces in London, was enlisted in the war and fought under Yigal Yadin, the famous archaeologist. His interest in letters went into archaeology. He became a renowned Hebrew calligrapher. If you have a ketubah that is illuminated and written after about the year 1800, he probably had something to do with the fact that that is a revived art. And one day, an amazing Yemenite scribe knocked on his door and said, "Mr. Ray, I understand that you know a lot about ancient scripts. Can I learn that? And I'll teach you about being a Torah scribe." And that was how, in his 40s, he began to study rabbinics and became a rabbi and a master scribe who knew 2,000 ways of writing the Hebrew alphabet. And at the end of his life, still it was the mention of Torah that engaged him. So he was a foot taller than me, 6'4", and whatever I share with you, I feel that I stand on my teacher's shoulders, however precariously. My training as a scribe included not only the laws of the writing of Torah, but also in repair. And it is the case that in the place that we're in today, there really is still more of a need for the repair and restoration of our Torah scrolls. The few Torahs that are written in this country are special cases, but the vast majority are written by modestly paid scribes who live in Israel and are supported by their families and their communities, so that a new Torah costs only as much as a moderately nice car. But the fact is that once upon a time, we were informed by mitzvah number 613. So as you roll through the entire Torah, you get to commandments. And rolling through, we have God saying to Moses on Mount Sinai, there's actually different numberings of it. "And now write this song for yourselves and teach it to the children of Israel." I never planned to be a Torah scribe. I was a toy maker before I trained to be a rabbi. But on my way, studying in rabbinical school, yes, I have 2 different ordinations from very different lineages, I was always looking for the hands-on things that we do in Jewish life, the things like matzah building and sukkah building. And I didn't go this direction, but circumcision. And then I learned about this commandment that says we can write Torah. Not only that, but as I looked into this more, I understood that we have been writing our Torahs by hand longer than we've had professional scribes or rabbis or synagogues or even a Torah service in which to read it in. It is that elemental. Torah informs all of Jewish life. Now, we say, we love Torah. Everyone loves Torah. And when we say it, we might mean the Torah that's full of lofty thoughts, or the Torah that inspires us to do good in the world. But I submit that it is something much more physical and elemental. So I'm holding a fragment of a Torah, and it's no longer kosher. But knowing that it was written following these ancient rules that were handed down orally and only written down about 1,500 years ago, this is no less, really, a sacred Sefer Torah than one that's written today, that's one that was written 250 or 300 years ago, part of a community that was destroyed or no longer exists. And when we think about the future, let's start with the past. That we have a tradition of our Torahs being directly descended from the first transmission of Torah. I'll get into that more as I do a little introduction about the tools and materials that go into it. But let's just look at this fragment. And it was written in a classic Ashkenazi style of writing, and it happens to be one of the most famous parts of Torah. In fact, this part of the Torah is so well known that our tradition is that we sing it every morning and night, twice a day, and other times as well. And since it is the evening, and since it is customary to do a whole service surrounding this, let's read this part of Torah. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Note the large dalet. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'chol levavcha, u'b'chol nafshecha, u'b'chol me'otecha, v'hayu ha'devarim ha'ele, asher anochi mitzavecha, hayom al levavecha, v'shinatam levanecha, v'dibarta bam, v'shivtecha b'beitecha, u'v'lechtecha b'derech, u'v'shokbecha u'v'kumecha, u'kshartam le'ot al yadecha, v'hayu letotafot bein einecha, u'ktavtam al mezuzot beitecha, u'visharecha. So more than twice a day, there is a time in the year when we read this. And maybe it's your fortune as a bar or bat mitzvah, or as someone who's volunteered to read Torah, that it's that week and you already know that Torah reading. So we have a physical relationship to our sacred text. This, I believe, is unique to the Jewish people. Not only do we have this unique relationship, but arguably, and maybe more than arguably, in a world that is changing in so many ways, a technological world, a social world, a Jewish world, Torah, specifically the handwriting of the 5 books, may be the one thing that we agree on and that holds us all together. When I even say we, and I think about who is the Jewish people, it's fluid. Only for 2,000 years have we had some sense of, well, it goes through a particular parent. And in the last 40 or 50 years, we've begun to question that. So here is our Torah. And if the lineage of this Torah goes through an incredible experience, an incredible providence, which is the story of the Memorial Scrolls Trust, which is about history and memory and loss and myth, this Torah, which probably was written by a scribe from or in Poland, circa 1900, and probably came to New York and then was sold to a synagogue in beautiful Vermont, its lineage goes back to the same place. And this Torah, or this fragment, I'll resist the temptation to say it was written upside down. And as I couldn't help but saying to the kids, this Torah, if George Washington were Jewish and had lived in Yemen, he might have read from this at his bar mitzvah. So a Torah that is probably a little bit older than scroll number 752 from Yemen, and reflecting different times and places and customs. It all goes back to the same source. Now, we could be historians, we could be sociologists, we could be students of myth, but we have a story that Torah tells of itself, which has been the story that has compelled us to write Torah. Any one of us can write a Torah scroll. It takes a long time, but there are materials and techniques that are, Moses didn't use this expression, but we can. They are not rocket science. I grew up in a Reform synagogue on Long Island that was the old school, possibly because my mother, who came from Breslau, which was then Germany, was used to a formality that is not so common in the Reform movement anymore. But at that time, there was an organ and high ceremony, and the ark was very, very high up. And the occasion of the Torah being brought out elicited a sense of awe, but also of distance. It was many years later that I understood that in fact our relationship to our text is intimate and physical at the same time that there's awe. There are at least 3 great Abrahamic religions: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. I'm a Doctor of Ministry student in a seminary, Hartford Seminary, that really celebrates the common roots of these 3 faiths. And yet, our relationship with our sacred text is radically different. In Islam is a tradition that these are the very words in which sacred text was received. But, as I learned from my classmates, a Quran that is photocopied and a Quran that is handwritten there's not a difference in their level of holiness. This is played out in politics as well. In Christianity, the sacred text, which is based on the teachings of Jesus in that age, in which the common language was Aramaic, written in Hebrew letters, and everyone knew Hebrew, comes to the Christian world already in translation, already through the lens of interpretation, which is a translation. In our world, we have translations, we have interpretations, we have accurate copies of this text that we can study anytime, any place, and yet there's a special place for the Torah that's written by a real, live member of the people of Israel, following the most ancient customs and traditional materials, and doing it in fulfillment of a commandment. So to back up, if I were to stand on one foot and teach all of Torah, I would say there's 3 overarching themes that go into this enterprise that we are engaging in by the restoring of this Torah. 1, longevity. That the way that the Torah that we have is incredibly ancient, and the ways that we work are incredibly ancient. And over the centuries and millennia, whenever a new technology arose, we considered it and said, should this change the way that we fundamentally write our Torahs? And the answer continues to be, and I would hope moving forward, whatever technological tools we may use to assist us, the essential act is still in real time, physically writing. And that should continue into the future. The Torah that was written in the days of our how many great-great-great-great-grandparents, with a little bit of work, okay, a few months, is a living Torah that we can use in the context of a Torah service, if it's done well enough. And the one that's written today, God willing, could be written by our children and grandchildren and generations forward. I love talking shop with other craftspeople. And some of the best shop talk has been with my ex-brother-in-law, who is a Lakota, American Indian. I consider him the equivalent of a rabbi. And he taught me about a concept, which I think is throughout the Indian world, of the 7th generation. That when you do something, if you're going to pour detergent into your river, if it could possibly have any effect 7 generations down, 200 years later, think twice. That's the timeline of Torah. Longevity. A second is peace. That Torah should be about peace and love and not war and not hatred. As we go into the tools and materials, you'll see that that's reflected in ways of working. But it is actually expressed in a way even in the first writing of the rules in Masechet Sofrim about 1,500 years ago. So when we look at these 2 Torahs, let's talk about materials. That whether it's the skin of a calf that's prepared as parchment, which is a mechanical process, or it's the skin of a deer that's tanned, a chemical process. Kosher animals, Torah is our source for what is a kosher animal. We have an ancient tradition that says if the animal died naturally or for food or was not careful crossing the street, we can make use of its skin, but that we not kill something for the express purpose. If every panel of Torah number 1412 were in perfect shape, but it was only, I wish, one panel that was disintegrating, and we were to say, let's write a new panel, and we were to see a beautiful cow walking in the parking lot, and to slaughter it in the most careful, kosher way, that would be invalid, because violence being done in the name of Torah. What we do with that skin, the preparing of it, has something in common with the actual writing or the using of tools. Every element that goes into the making of Torah, the repairing of Torah, has with it a kavanah. Kavanah just means intention. And it serves to raise it up in holiness. So the words in Hebrew, the third element is ma'alin bakodesh. If you come up to the Torah, it's called an aliyah. So this is, think of degrees or steps and the idea is that we are engaged in this sacred enterprise in which, beginning with things of the natural world, again, something in common with my Lakota brother-in-law, we engage with it ourselves physically for a sacred purpose. And when we do that, we are being partners with God and changing it, sort of an alchemy or cooking. And it becomes something more precious. And it becomes, in a sense, holier. So that the piece of skin, which already keeps some of the holiness of the animal, in fact, I have a very nice piece of skin here. You know, the technology that we use for writing Torah was the technology of publishing until not too many hundreds of years ago. So 400 years ago, picked it up at an antique store at Portobello Road in London when I was very young. It's beautiful. And, you know, if it were bleach, could I write a Torah on it? No, because I cannot imagine that this parchment was prepared for the purpose of writing Torah. It is stated explicitly. So, scraps of parchment are made for a holy purpose. And if you write a word of Torah on it, that raises it. And if you write a name of God on it, it raises it higher yet. So, this concept of Ma'alin Bakodesh says, yes, it's all holy, but there's somewhat of a hierarchy. Not a very popular idea in a radically egalitarian world that we live in, and yet it comes down to something as practical as you have a Chumash, that is the book that has the whole printed Torah that we use in the reading, next to you on a very small seat during a service, and you have a prayer book that has some passages, like the Shema, written in Hebrew. The one that's got more Torah in it, you should have on top. That awareness, it's almost a sort of magical thinking that little kids do naturally, is infused. Another way of saying it is, there is a consciousness of the creating of everything that goes into it that is love, and without it, it's not kosher, and yet those are not seen. Much of my life is spent alone in a now very well-lit studio, and there's no one monitoring me. But I think that scribes have had a sense all along that however you conceive of God, that one is breathing down your neck. And we can trust that the Torahs that were written for us today, or 250 years ago, or 300 years ago, were written by scribes, members of our people, who took it that seriously that they did whatever they could to do this work with integrity. So that is a lofty abstract. We also have rituals and traditions that keep it accurate. We have been engaged in a 3,000-year-old spell-checking project. And the way that it works is that when Torah is written, it's checked. And it's then presumed to be kosher. But if, God forbid, we're reading this restored Torah and find that the scribe I mean, imagine who that scribe was and what he wore. Made a mistake. The Torah is at that moment no longer kosher, but it was kosher to that point, and then we correct it again. So not only do we have the writer being careful and the checkers being careful, we have everyone who read that Torah being careful. And there is such remarkable, there is such remarkable accuracy in the transmission of Torah that when scholars talk about scribal error, it really is unimaginable in a Jewish context. Because we as a people, collectively, sort of crowdsourcing, we know if a word is written wrong. And even if we didn't notice it before, we do. So this is a background into the enterprise of writing Torah that is very, very old. I'd like to do a little introduction into just what are some of the tools and materials that go into the writing, but also repair. But just a thought about how incredible it is. The words that Paula used, or actually maybe it was the rabbi in the film, were that we are entrusted with this precious gift of this Torah. And in fact, what we are entrusted with is the precious gift of every Torah. And there remains, to borrow Rabbi Heschel's words, a radical amazement with Torah that I think in this time and in this place is in high focus because of the Holocaust. My family, both my parents, escaped from Germany in 1939. As my father said, he was one of the lucky ones. Some of our family wasn't. Many of us have either personal connections or know someone who does. It's really very immediate. And Torah is serving a purpose in a way that it didn't before, which is, here is the Torah, beyond the meaning of the words, keeping alive something that was lost and is still so dreadful to really consider that we need to sort of bracket it. Even today, 2,000 years after the destruction of the temple, we have to keep some place in our hearts and in the year in which we feel the immeasurable loss. And that has been part of our story. Most of what has been precious to us has been lost. Even memories have been lost. So here is something about the Torah that in its reading is so alive and yet is very much about memory. But if you think back a few thousand years, what a technological marvel of the age that we could take thoughts, whether it be lists of how much stuff should be in the king's storehouses, or our most precious wisdom in Torah, and we can record it, and it can be played back at a later time. Now, surprise, I love old technology, and one of my great loves is this. So many of us are old enough to know that recordings were sometimes something that spun around, and if you took your fingernail, you could have it ride in one of these grooves, and the vibrations would make you be able to, it would vibrate through the bones in your body, or the nail, and you could feel the music. So we used to have a physical relationship with our music. I cannot resist, but I was sitting in my favorite little cafe, Elbow Room Cafe, with my tablet and scribing some notes, and a little anxious about time, and this guy I know said, "Oh, Rabbi, I've been looking for you. I have this box of Hebrew records in the back of my car. Can I give them to you?" And I was gifted with 3 amazing 100-year-old Yiddish and Hebrew records. And so here we are. So the story of recorded sound, there was Edison, cylinders. There was Berliner, who was a German Jew. He actually came, I believe, from Bohemia, Moravia, our neighborhood. And they are known as the ones who started this industry of the recording industry. But people don't think so much about, I just forgot his name. in the 1850s who recorded sound. And only today, in the last 10 years, were people at Stanford, MIT, able to take this visual representation of sound and scan it. And for the first time a few years ago, we heard someone singing Au clair de la lune in French from 1859, 16, 17, 18 years older than the oldest existing recordings. What was going on there was that the phonautograph, that part I remember, was developed for the sole purpose of studying sound, of seeing a visual representation of it by scratching the vibrations of sound into soot on paper. Let's go back to the commandment to write Torah, in which God says to Moses in the first person, second person plural, "And now y'all write this song for yourselves and teach it to the children of Israel." So we have 613a and 613b. 613b, teaching Torah to the children of Israel, is what we do. It was what my rabbinical education is about. If I will, and early enough that we can have some conversation, we're engaging in words of Torah. It's really the lifeblood of Judaism, to be engaging in acts and words of Torah. And we're all teaching and we're all learning. It's the power of studying Torah. But 613a is saying, "And now y'all must record these words for yourselves." So the commandment to write Torah is so physical that it does not actually require the playback mechanism, which is what we do in the Torah service. One of my favorite books, called The 613th Commandment, deals with this question of how is it that when we do have the honor of coming up to a Torah, we say a blessing. We say a blessing. And, how is it that we're commanded, it's amazing how you get up here and simple words will come to you. We're commanded around the reading of Torah. And he postulates that, in fact, when you come up for this honor of reading Torah, you momentarily take such close possession of the Torah that it is credited towards the writing of Torah. Okay. I'll put my technology aside. So, how we physically record Torah has its own meaning beyond the actual reading of it. And what is this thing? What is this enterprise? That we do it, first of all, in conscious fulfillment of a commandment. Now, we'll have time to talk about this later, and I want to ask Ruth and Paula and others to help discuss it. A project over the course of this year, which is the restoration of this Torah, in which there will be many, many letters that need to be restored. And, Ruth, I'm going to ask you to bring up the pictures when we look at some of those letters that need to be restored, but not quite yet. And each one of those is an opportunity to engage in the commandment. What will happen on Simchat Torah, or really just before, because writing Torah is work, so to be avoided on the Sabbath or on holidays in which traditionally we don't do work, is to finish writing the last letters that need to be completed so that every one of the 304,805 letters is there and present, and it becomes a kosher Torah again. So each of these is an opportunity to physically engage with Torah, to be co-creators with God in it. We have the skin of a kosher animal. What is a kosher animal? Well, the Torah itself is a guide about it. And therefore, we can have Torah written on calf or deer, or were there to be more Torah writing in this country, we would be using the roadkill for a more sacred purpose and elevating in that way. But it could be bison, you'll never find a horse or pig Torah. So those are beautiful materials. Sheep is another one, goat. And each material has a different quality. And then there's the tool. And the most common tool for writing is the quill. Now, parchment is an amazing material. This is actually parchment that is ruled with a sharp instrument for the writing of mezuzah, the mezuzah scroll. And it's a lovely velvety material, and if you use a chisel-like quill, you can get beautiful fine lines and very, very, very small, crisp letters. The way of writing and this is really classic Ashkenazi style of writing, the way of writing in the Sephardic world, even to this day, is on leather that is tanned. And instead of the inside, which is really a suede that we're writing on, think velvety, it's a very smooth material. If you look closely at the back of an uncoated Ashkenazi Torah or the front of a Sephardic Torah, you can see the little hair follicles where. And that is traditionally written with a stick or a reed pen that functions very much like, for the kids who were with me earlier, a felt tip marker. And it enables a style of writing that's very distinct. 75 years ago, the vast majority of Torah scribes in the world were lost. My teacher estimated that 5,000 scribes were murdered. And it was the case in Europe and in much of the Arab world as well. You know, these are two huge civilizations of Jewish life that have mostly ended within the space of a few decades. There was a very rich local culture, a diversity of scripts, so that my teacher, blessed memory, could look at a script and identify, he said within 50 or 100 miles, I can do it by country, of where it was written and when. And you know, well, this is a scribe who was writing in Warsaw, but he was obviously trained at Vilna. And one of my hopes of what comes out of our experience together is being conscious of the style of writing of this Torah and of other Torahs, wherever we've lived until today. The place and the time we lived in has been reflected in the way that we write Torah. So, and it's written with ink. The ink, it follows an old recipe, but the essential part is that it be based on water, and yet it be semi-permanent and be black. And even if your ink fades to a lovely reddish brown, like part of our Torah, like the original copy of the Declaration of Independence, it needs to start out black. I make ink, but I wouldn't trust that my ink would last more than another 75 or 100 years. So the materials that are available today, which used to be made locally, we more or less trust scribes and families in Israel who produce the materials. Torah is sewn together, the 50 or 60 panels, with a special thread, gidin. Gidin in Hebrew just means sinew. And it harkens back to the story in our history of Jacob wrestling with an angel or a being just before he meets his brother again. And in order to let go, he gets a new name, and he gets a new name called Israel. And then he's touched by this being, and it has a limp. So the tradition is that he was wounded probably in the sciatica nerve. So if possible, it's that tendon or nerve, connected with that story, from the same kind of animal, not the very animal, that is hand-spun into this thread that's used for sewing. Now, until about 10 or 12 years ago, one could say this has been the only part of Torah produced by women. But we're living in a remarkable age in which there's a growing handful of women who are writing Torah, and those Torahs are being accepted by congregations, and our ancient tradition keeps on evolving. So this too, as it's made, is made in love with intention for a sacred purpose. So before moving on to this particular Torah, let's just come back and the Shema and V'ahavta, written in the entire Torah, otherwise known in Yiddish as the ganze Megillah, the whole thing. By the way, the Megillah, which is the book of Esther, is one of the very few other books of the Bible that is still written by hand using the same tools and technology but doesn't need to be, and doesn't contain names of God. It's not quite on the same level of holiness and anxiety, and therefore there's latitude with Torah, with the Megillah, in terms of style and layout and even illumination, none of which we find in the Torah. So in the Torah is only the 304,805 letters written correctly, with some large and some small, no more, no less. So I said that my full title, it's not yet a doctor because I didn't do that, but I'm a Sofer Stam, and Stam is an acronym for the three places that we find Torah. There's the S for the Sefer Torah, and this is one part of an entire Torah scroll. You know, even though it's not complete, we can still learn from it, we can pray from it, we can dance with it at Simchat Torah, it's still regarded as a sacred Torah. And then there's the M of Stam, which is for mezuzah. And remember when we sang the V'ahavta, we talked about, and they should be, teach them to your children, they should be on the doorposts of your house and on your gate. So the words that are inside the box that's on the doorposts of our houses and gates are those two passages of Torah that refer to it. My son, the software engineer, says that's recursiveness. And this is, it's in a bag because it was checked, and it is the text, the mezuzah scroll, written very small with the same materials. And if you're close, the daled of the word echad is still written large. So that's the end of Sofer Stam. And then the third one is in tefillin, otherwise known as phylacteries. And basically we have leather boxes and with straps. And sewn up tight inside are pieces of Torah. And the arm one has 4 passages written on one piece of parchment. And of course it contains the V'ahavta, which talks about, and they should be a sign on your arm and between your eyes. You know, that means something powerful and inspirational, but it's also physical. And our custom is to take those words and write them and then wrap ourselves in words of Torah in those places. And even there, here's the Shema and V'ahavta, written so small that my eyesight can't do it without aids. That's the care and precision and love that we put into this enterprise. So I would like to one more word about preparation for writing. So whether you're sitting down to write an entire Torah or just fixing a single letter, there are ritual preparations. Who would want to write a Torah and not do some level of personal prayer beforehand? So I tend to do a full morning service. And then if it's one of the days that a name of God will be written, we bring ourselves in a heightened level of holiness and do a mikveh, or ritual bath. I try to do that at the time of the year when I can go to the beach on the river near my house. But when we get to the actual writing, there are preparations. One is the writing out of the name of Amalek and then obliterating it by scribbling all over it. So this may not be a very well-known commandment, but we have a version of it that we do very commonly next week, which is the descendant of Amalek, Haman, we drown out with our voices. Actually, I just learned in Portuguese Sephardic congregations, they had bylaws that said you could only tap your cane but not make too much noise. So we have this powerful commandment in our Torah that Amalek, whether for those of you who are of that age or have kids of it or just like it, it's kind of like Voldemort. Some amorphous force that for whatever reason has sought to destroy us or undermine us, and is mentioned in the Torah. So, that word has to be written in the Torah with the same respect and holiness. But as a preparation, write the name of Amalek. And for that purpose of crossing an Amalek's name, I have a quill that I give a bad haircut to and ink for that purpose. And if you look through my Geniza, which is a storage place for all of the sacred materials that are really waiting to be buried. There are scraps that are just the name of Amalek written out and crossed out, and that represents a day of work. The other is that then to make this declaration before any writing. And then you pick up a feather pen. So a normal quill in my studio looks like this. And you know, I have magnifying glasses, and I'll cut the quill to the right width and angle and flex, and as best I can match the script in which I was working. But if a name of God is to be written, there is stopping, doing a ritual hand washing with the blessing, picking up a quill that is cut especially for that purpose. That's not it, but anyway, it's ones in which I remove half of the barbs, and ink that's only for that purpose, and then make a declaration before the writing of any of the names of God that goes like this: Behold, I am writing the name of God for the sake of the holiness of God's name. At that point, you're really paying attention to what you're doing. Now, we don't trust memory. Once upon a time, we trusted our memory for writing Megillah and mezuzah scrolls and other things, because of course, we all know those texts by heart anyway. No one does it. But the tradition that we can rely on the accuracy of the Torah scroll wherever or whenever it was written is so great that we always have a text in front of us. So if you have the opportunity to assist in the writing of letter, even if it's connecting a little broken piece, there'll always be another Torah or something like this. This belonged to my late teacher, and it's called a Tikkun Sofrim. Tikkun means repair. I think of it as tool. And it is the text of the Torah, but without any of those aids for reading, like the vowels or the cantillation. But wherever there's a large letter or a small letter, it's noted. Or if there's a name of God and it's unclear, because, you know, we have a name of God, which is Elohim, and it could be as if we're writing it with the lowercase g. That means don't worship those other lowercase g gods, in which case you use a regular quill and a regular intention. But if it's the one who created the heavens and the earth, well, that's the name of God, and you don't want to do that without doing the ritual preparations. So it's with this aid that we have the wisdom of our people to maintain the accuracy and integrity. Okay. So, I wanted to, Ruth, would you mind? So, I'm going to talk a little bit about this scroll, and I won't retell it too much, but every Torah is amazing. The fact that in this day and age, we write anything by hand is remarkable. I want to say that in another way. Something that was utterly unremarkable about Torah scrolls back when this deed was written for some farm in England in 1620, and I'm happy to pass it around. You know, there were no Jews allowed back in for another 34 years, but they would have said, so you write your Torah by hand. Nowadays, the fact that this is written by hand is sometimes the most remarkable thing about Torah. And that is the nature of Torah, that we keep on finding new meaning in Torah. We find new interpretations. Who would have ever thought that text would be something that's not even physical and that it is absolutely free? So when this scroll was written, I think I'm going to refer to it, but we'll use the photos to really show. It took as long to write this Torah as it does today. So if you think that, what is the value of the 100 or so skins that were prepared so that 50 or 60 were good enough, and the value of the solid year of work in a really beautiful scroll, maybe a year and a half. And the answer is, it was worth